Welcome to Chapter 19, Part 1 on International Advertising and Social Media. Is Lego racist? Well, according to the Turkish, their Jabba the Hutt palace was a mocking replica of a mosque. And I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it does bear a striking resemblance to the Hagia Sophia. So it provides an interesting example of a marketing blunder. And let's look at some of the ways that you can avoid international marketing issues. Specifically, we'll look at some of the ways that marketing materials might have to be modified, a couple of guidelines, and we'll drill down a little bit into public relations, sales promotions, and social media. So marketing is a bit broader than the way we stereotypically think about it in terms of just advertising. In fact, an easy way to think about marketing is in terms of the 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion. So if you think about the Jabba the Hutt palace, did Lego spend enough time thinking about the product itself and how that might be problematic to Turkish sensibilities? We've talked about product and price a little bit before, so I won't belabor those points. Place refers to distribution, but they keep the P to make it a bit more memorable. And then promotion is what we'll spend the bulk of this discussion on. So promotion are all of those communication elements to persuade someone to buy your product or to buy your idea. And when I say buy your idea, it's to make the point that marketing can be about more than just selling a product. So case in point, the African rhino recently was on the point of extinction in many countries, but partly due to successful demarketing efforts on the part of the World Wildlife Federation, they are starting to make a comeback. So marketing, as we said, can be about more than just promoting products. In fact, when I was a college student, I did a stint at the Organization of American States when I was involved in marketing, or more specifically, demarketing drug use in Latin America. But back to products. So let's look at another blooper, if you will. We talked about Levi's a couple of times in the distant past. Levi's was so successful with a particular commercial that showed a kind of a cool cat, a young man strolling down the street in the US, that they said, oh, this is great. Let's use exactly the same commercial in Mexico. And it bombed. And you might say, well, why? It worked in the US. The reason is the Mexican young men looked at the young man all by himself and said, my gosh, the guy's got no friends. So from a collectivist culture, the imagery just didn't make sense. So much of advertising is based on American practice because US agencies have followed their customers into the global realm. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Let's take another look at an example, a contrasting example. This one also from Mexico, but from a Mexican brand, or what at the time was a Mexican brand. Specifically Corona. Corona in the US is positioned as kind of I don't want to say upscale, but a party beer. It sells at a premium price. Interestingly enough, in Mexico, however, it's a downscale beer. So some noticeable differences. Other differences to consider in terms of modifying advertising messages are the directness of the message. In the US, because we're a low context culture, see, we're hearkening back to Chapter 10 yet again, we tend to utilize very direct messages. In other countries, notably Japan, that is considered offensive. The Japanese look at an American-style direct ad and say, how could the marketing company possibly know what I want or what I need? So that is an area that may need to be softened a bit. Another example is comparisons. It's not terribly uncommon in this country to say, okay, here's 2 leading detergents, here's how they compare. In some countries, that's not even legal. Humor also varies, and we'll see an example in the social media realm where humor bombed to the nth degree, but we do have a different sense of humor. If you look at the British sense of irony, that doesn't necessarily play in other parts of the world. Coming back yet again to chapter 10, let's think about gender roles and how those might be more traditional, let's say in African countries, and less traditional in Northern Europe. And yet another factor to consider is explicitness in ads. Many European ads for things like deodorant are much more explicit than they are in other countries. Okay, so let's look at some other marketing bloopers, if you will. One of the classic ones that we've been seeing recently is, of course, Samsung. 20 years ago, that was was a no-name brand, and now it's built to a household name. However, they have had problems, as you well know, with their Note 7 catching on fire. And that's a problem in and of itself. But the problem is their response to it really compounded the issue. So this is getting into the arena of international public relations. And public relations is maintaining positive relations with all your various publics. And your publics, an obvious public is your customers, but there are other publics that have to be considered, like the media, like various government watchdog agencies, like the governments of the countries in which you're doing business. Coming back to the Samsung issue, in most countries, they were criticized for not responding quickly enough. And then specifically in China, they were slammed for that and for discrimination. Because in the U.S., eventually they did say, okay, we're going to pull the phones and we're going to compensate consumers. In China, they didn't. They just said, the phones don't really need to be exchanged. And in fact, there was a Chinese man who took a video of his smartphone on fire. And the Samsung folks allegedly offered him hush money, $900 to keep the video private. So public relations experts will always say that you need to respond openly and fully, but especially in an era of social media where that type of news travels virally, it's absolutely important, imperative to be transparent and to be forthcoming, not to be guarded and slow as they appeared to be. One more blooper for you. In the spring of 2006, 12,000 of 20,000 runners competing in a marathon in China were injured because this was a premium item that you see pictured that was given out, and it was in English, so they looked at it and they said, what do you give people at a marathon? Well, obviously you give them energy bars, right? So they took a bite out of it, and they realized it wasn't an energy bar, it was soap. So a lot of people got really sick. So it brings us into another element of the promotion portion of marketing, which is sales promotions. Now, sales promotions are an added incentive that could be given to somebody within the distribution chain or could be given to the consumers themselves. And examples include things like contests, premiums. This was a giveaway that was a little bit problematic. Others that are worth considering are things like point of purchase displays, trade show exhibits, money off offers, coupons. It's important to consider country differences. Coupons, for example, are not legal in every market. A premium or giveaway item that might be appealing in one market may not be appealing in another. Case in point, if you go to the grocery store and they're touting some latest, greatest thing and trying to get you to buy it, usually they'll give you some sort of little kitchen gadget to go along with it. And that seems to work well in the United States. In Latin America, those types of little kitchen gadgets are less prized. Because think about it, the consumer who would be hopefully buying the big ticket item, who was persuaded by that, wouldn't be using it in Latin America. Their maid would be. Okay, moving on. One more blooper for you, and this was a big one, a bad one, and a fairly recent one. And that was Hawkers, which is an international sunglasses brand. And speaking of humor, they were not trying to be malicious. They were trying to be cute. They were trying to be funny. And so they sent out this tweet saying Mexicans, put on these glasses so they can't see your crying eyes tomorrow when building the wall. And needless to say, that didn't go over very well. And in fact, they offended Sergio Perez, who is a Formula One racer, and this was the company that was sponsoring him. And he said, you know what? I'm absolutely fed up. I'm going to cut ties. And to make it worse, is there were, I think, about 20,000 glasses in production with his name on them that they had to stop production on. So, yet another bugaboo. Social media is a fascinating realm because it's constantly changing, and it's, as you probably well know, fairly easy to trip yourself up, especially given the vagaries of dealing internationally.